can you think of any other approved drug on the market where 23% of the people taking it are having psychiatric morbidity and hemorrhaging?
All right, everyone. Happy Easter. Welcome back to the LOOPcast, Catholic Vote's weekly rundown of all things faith, culture, and politics. And I know I sure enjoyed my break. However, we did have some breaking news on Good Friday. And because the Loop team here is the most talented, hardworking, dedicated group of them all, the FDA Mifepristone reversal case broke on Friday. And I remember trying to stay off my phone, and I got that alert. And of course, I had to go to Slack to see what people were saying. And I just turned the phone around and showed my wife and just said, the amount of lives that are going to be saved by this, even if there's fights over it, is just unbelievable. I think that some people have described this case as almost bigger and more important than the Dobbs decision. That's up for debate, but we have all the details on that for you here. And Erika, I know you spent some time writing over that period of time. Could you just run us through some stats of the case itself and what happened over the weekend?
Sure. So I'm going to focus on the adverse effects that the abortion pill mifepristone has on women, because we've already covered in great detail the legal implications of the case, the ins and outs of the FDA approval process, and we'll get into that a little bit. But I would point everyone back to my interview with Erika Baptist, who was senior counsel from Alliance Defending Freedom on this case, for all of that, if you're really interested. But here's some interesting facts about the drug mifepristone itself. And the fascinating thing is that these statistics go back to the early 2000s. We've known for a very long time that this drug is not safe for women to take. And what you'll hear in the news right now, all the mainstream media, the line is, the FDA approved this 20 years ago. It's it's been demonstrated by science to be safe. No, the data has actually been obfuscated and hidden by the FDA and by the other side. So back in 2006, the approval of mifepristone was under scrutiny, and the subsequent monitoring of the drug was deemed by a House subcommittee to be unusual and demonstrated a lower standard of care for women than any other drug on the market. Yeah, Josh.
And just to give people a heads up, it was approved in 2000. So you're saying by 2006, they're
investigating it, right?
Right.
Yeah, and the House found that there were, out of 575,000 prescriptions of this drug for the purpose of aborting a child, killing a child, there were 950 adverse events. And the ruling itself, the judge's ruling, quoted stats that the ADF had supplied to the judge that women who receive abortions have 154% higher risk of death by suicide. All of these things are known, and they go back 20 years. Now, something else you'll hear in the mainstream media is, well, there haven't been adverse effects. Well, the reason is that in 2016, the FDA changed the requirements surrounding the prescription of mifepristone and actually stopped tracking adverse effects. So the only place that we can go for actual data on what this drug does to women taking it is to Europe. So the ADF used a study from Finland, because Finland tracks everything and has no problem coding abortion drugs and people and seeing what happens to women after they take it. Now, this drug in the Finnish study, which I'll link in the show notes because this is staggering, 19% of teenagers taking mifepristone to induce abortion experienced adverse events. That number gets jacked up to 23% of adult women over the age of 18 having adverse effects. And the most common of these was hemorrhage, required surgical evacuation of fetal remains, incomplete abortion, and infection. They also include things like psychiatric morbidity and injury. Now, can you think of any other approved drug on the market where 23% of the people taking it are having psychiatric morbidity and hemorrhaging? I mean, these numbers are just staggering. So when you hear in the news, oh, it's been safe, it's used by so many women, just remember, we have the data. It's from Finland, but women's bodies in Finland work the same as women's bodies in the United States. This is not a safe drug.
We need more honesty in this debate. Obviously, pro-lifers have a problem with aborting a baby, and people who support abortion have no problem. The question, what's nice about the fact that they're monitoring this in Finland is they're just looking at the results, and we can look to it. And it's like, whether or not you think abortion is legal or not, is this pill having major health effects. And we shouldn't have our eyes blinded by ideology. We should be able to look at it and say, this is dangerous. And just because they can say, well, so many women take it and don't have problems, like, I guess but if you said 23%, I mean, that almost 1 in 4, 1 in 5 are having a problem with it. This is horrible.
I mean, not just problems. We're talking about hemorrhaging. Imagine having to get surgical evacuation after being sold that this was a completely safe, nothing's wrong with
Privacy
it
of
type
your
drug.
home. It'll be private.
Privacy of your
right?
home, and then you don't realize that you need to run to the hospital because you're hemorrhaging.
Yeah, and it's completely scandalous that the FDA in the United States had not been tracking this information intentionally because they were blinded by a group of people that at all costs believe that women should be able to take the lives of their children at any time.
At any time for any reason.
It's
politics over medicine.
Totally.
Exactly.
And it's so ironic that pro-lifers are accused of being just pro-child, not pro-woman. And they're just turning a blind eye to 1 in 5 women who have horrible complications. Like, I guess I just asked the question, who's really pro-woman? We all should be pro-woman and concerned about this. And to be honest as well, the FDA does not have a very good track record of safety and regulations. Also worth pointing out as well, the United States is one of 2 countries, I believe it's the United States and New Zealand, that allow drug companies to advertise as much as possible. So 70% of advertisements you see on TV are actually funded by pharmaceutical companies. There's many regulations in Europe to stop that kind of thing from happening because, once again, we just see the wholesale marketing tactics go for drugs that maybe aren't completely safe or completely necessary, but they contribute to the bottom line of some of these countries. So
it's big
always
business.
follow the money. Always follow the money.
Well, and it's worth noting, it's not like if this were removed formally from the FDA approved drug list, it wouldn't be like the first time that's ever happened. There are many drugs that had been approved by the FDA that were later removed. Like one Bextra, it was approved, right around the same time as Mifepristone, and it got removed from the market in 2005 because it had serious cardiovascular adverse effects, like death, stroke. So there's other ones. It's not like it's a totally never happened before. Oh, the FDA would only approve it if it's perfectly wonderful and totally safe. Yeah. No, I don't think
wake
so,
up.
bro. I mean, there's other ones that have been approved and have been removed from the market, and this one should join that list. We'll post a whole list of drugs that have been approved by the FDA and later removed. We'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah, and I wanted to just go back to Josh's point. Like, we absolutely, as pro-life Catholics, which shouldn't even be an adjective for Catholic. As Catholics, right, we don't even need the adjective. As Catholics, absolutely, this drug is 100%, bad for the child, for the unborn child. And something that was really interesting in the reaction to the judge's ruling is that the judge in the ruling actually uses the language like the death of the unborn child, or it ends the life of a human unborn child. And the media just went bonkers. NPR's analysis of the case was, how dare he use such inflammatory language? And you're like, okay, who's actually the scientific one? What is it, a baby kangaroo? I mean, it's not like an unborn kangaroo child, is it? So I come on, yeah, the whole like, who is really pro-woman here? Who is really pro-science and objective and using the correct language to describe things? It's definitely not the leftist pro-abortion, kill your baby for any reason side.
Right. I don't think we really need to convince the audience here that this pill is bad for unborn. Yeah, welcome to the choir. But I think something that a service we could provide here, because we've been following it so closely, is that I think what's been confusing to some people is that Judge Kaczmarek issued this in Texas, and then there was another judge in Washington that actually did kind of the reverse. And so there's a little bit of gray area to the producer of Mifepristone, like, okay, I've been told by one person I can't produce this anymore. I've been told by another I definitely should produce this. So could you go over, Erika, what the gray area is there and where this is all heading?
Yeah, so about an hour after Judge Kaczmarek in Amarillo, Texas, issued the injunction that orders the FDA to withdraw its approval for Mifepristone, within an hour, Judge Rice, another federal judge in Washington state, he issued an order to the FDA to secure access to Mifepristone, to the abortion drug, in 17 deep blue states and Washington, D.C. And the usual suspects, Colorado, Connecticut, my home state's on there, Vermont, of course, sorry, Michigan's on there, a couple. We'll put the list in the show notes. But these states had previously sued and actually asked the judge to direct the FDA to expand access to the abortion pill. The judge didn't do that, but Judge Rice did say the FDA should secure access. So like you said, Tom, in these 17 states and DC, there are now conflicting rulings. And Judge Kaczmarek, in his ruling, he gave the Biden administration 7 days to appeal before it would go into effect, which they did in an emergency appeal on Monday. They appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court, which is the next step up. And they're arguing that the Alliance Defending Freedom clients had no standing, and that the case should be moved up in the courts, and that there should be no injunction, no stopping this drug while it's moving through the courts. And we expect that ruling later this week from the Fifth Circuit. So definitely stay tuned.
There's some irony in here that the Catholic Biden administration did this on Easter Monday, right? There's got to be, there's a joke in there somewhere.
So much irony.
So,
and yet no surprise.
Yeah, and yet no surprise, unfortunately. So what's the bottom line here, Josh? Is this going to go to the Supreme Court and we're going to have to get a hearing on this?
It may ultimately get to the Supreme Court, but it's hard to say. I mean, it's almost certainly going to go to the Fifth Circuit Court, which is where Judge Kaczmarek is in. And so the whole Fifth Circuit Court will debate it. And then the pro-aborts and the Biden administration will challenge that. And the Supreme Court might just say, we're going to let it stand. That's possible. They might. But, because you need 4 people on the court to hear it at the Supreme Court level. It might, I'm guessing it will go to the Supreme Court, though, because like you say, you've got, anytime there's the circuit courts are split, it's like a perfect invitation for the Supreme Court to kind of settle it once and for all. So I do suspect it will go to the Supreme Court. But, it'll be interesting to see what will happen. I mean, the state, if the Supreme Court were to hear this case and were to rule that Mifepristone should be removed from the market, don't be surprised if this goes right back to the Congress, and it might be, a big fight there. Maybe pro-lifers are able to stop it, but they'll try to pass a bill to just say this should be legal. And then states like California and New York will find a way that, they'll say, because maybe they'll have it manufactured in California and you can purchase it there, and it's not interstate travel. Same thing with New York. So, I mean, they're going to find it's the abortion industry loves the fact that they can send these death pills out through the mail, and they're going to find whatever ways possible to try to keep it going. We still need to fight, obviously. So there's a lot to be said on this. This fight is going to continue for some time.
Yeah, and it seems like people have been throwing punches here in the reactions, and some really notable reactions to this were AOC went on a CNN show and she suggested that we should just ignore the ruling that said that you can no longer produce this, you can no longer use it for abortion means, mifepristone specifically. There was even some Republicans that suggested that you should. Nancy Mace suggested that this should just be ignored. And then, so those two were major reactions. I don't know how much weight they really carry. But then with the HHS and the Biden administration, Biden came out basically saying that if this can happen to mifepristone, this could happen to any prescription drug. So if all of a sudden people just were mad at insulin, for example, insulin could be made illegal. I just want everyone to know, I don't think these are very good faith arguments, but I think that they're worth...
Obviously it's not. Come on.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah.
Yeah. So Josh, what would you say to?
I mean,
both of
Nancy
those
Mace
things?
is a pro-abortion Republican from South Carolina, in a very, her district is it's a swing district. She barely won the primary. She's going to get challenged again. I don't think she represents a large portion of the Republican Party. However, I do think there is in the Republican Party, in the House, in the Senate, a reluctance to touch the abortion issue. See, we looked at the Dobbs decision as this great thing, obviously, right? It allows states like Texas and Idaho to pass, strong pro-life laws to save babies. But in Washington, D.C., they're like, this is awesome. We don't have to deal with abortion ever again. Like, what? Yeah, it's the states. We don't have to talk about it anymore. And it shows like a reluctance, like the last thing they want to deal with. They want to pass bills, to fund pork projects and do all sorts of things. you know, military, bombing countries. All that stuff is fun. They love to do that in Washington, D.C. They like to, they call it guns and butter or whatever.
Guns and butter.
Benson, a new band name called it.
That sounds like a garage band.
And the thing is, Nancy Mace looks around and she sees all these Republicans who are very hesitant to talk about, the abortion issue. And she's answering her call to step up and say, be aggressive and in favor of abortion, because she realizes that too many other pro-life Republicans are like, well, I guess it's in the, it's a state issue now. So that's the problem. And that's why I feel like Republicans, need in Washington, D.C. need to understand, first of all, there's no getting away from it. It's not like, okay, great, you're off the hook. You never have to talk about abortion ever again. No, like, look at what Biden is doing with the military. He's facilitating the payment, like service members to get abortions. He's using our taxpayer dollars to help women in the military get abortions. Oh, you can't get an abortion here at this Air Force base, like in North Dakota? We'll fly you somewhere where you can get it and kill your baby. Like, that's completely unconscionable. And it's like, but, Republicans, and thank God for Senator Tuberville from Alabama stepping up and saying, I'm fighting this. He's realizing this game is not over. Like, the left hasn't gone, oh, I guess, gosh, with Roe v. Wade overturned, now it's in the states. We'll stop trying to arm the federal government and make it an abortion activist. Like, hello, they're still pushing on every level.
So quick question for you then, and I think some people may have observed this and want answers to it. There's been some studies going around, some polls going around saying that abortion is kind of a politically unpopular issue, and that by touching it, it's somewhat nuclear waste, and it will lead to you potentially losing your election or losing political points. And I think that those studies are a little bit misleading, and I would actually just, as a political wonk, I'd just be curious to hear your perspective. Should people just not touch it at all, or is there an effective rhetoric to kind of win on these issues?
Yeah, so there's legislation in Florida that would protect babies, the heartbeat bill, and they did polling on it, and there's this truly deceptive poll because the legislation there provides exceptions for rape, incest, and life of mother. Now, of course, I would love a bill that protected every baby, okay? This bill does provide exceptions up until 15 weeks, and then after that, no abortions. And what this poll in Florida did is it said, this heartbeat bill doesn't provide exemptions. How do you feel about this bill? And the polling was horrible then. Most voters were like, yeah, no, I don't think we should do that bill. That sounds a little too extreme, because the American people aren't yet with us on this 100%. But the fact is, I hate it when pollsters lie. You're describing this bill in a way that's it's just like the "don't say gay" thing.
Yeah,
that was
it's a bill
never
that
what that
doesn't
law
exist.
was.
Right.
Yeah, so the media realizes, wait a minute now, if I lie about this, then I'll rally the American people against this legislation, and it frustrates me. Now, I look forward to the day where every baby is protected and there's no exceptions. I would love that. But in the meantime, if Florida is going to make a massive improvement and save a lot of babies, I'm all for it. It's like there's a fire going on. Save as many babies as you can. There's a lot of arguments on that in the pro-life movement. I get it, fine. But the fact is, the media was just lying with this poll. And if you actually poll people on what the bill is, people are like, yeah, that sounds reasonable. I like that. And, the Democrats are convinced, hey, we need to make it seem like the pro-life agenda, passing the pro-life laws are horrible. Well, look, they made the point that the governor of Oklahoma, super pro-life, he might lose re-election because of the pro-life bill he's passing. He wins in a romp. And then Florida, Ron DeSantis had passed a previous bill that was
15
pro-life.
week,
Yeah. And, Florida's a swing state and he barely won the last time. This might cost him. He wins by 20 points. Brian Kemp gets reelected in Georgia. Greg Abbott gets reelected in Texas. All these guys had bills. Now, so what does the pro-abortion movement say? But see, that was the legislature dominated by men. When it comes in front of the people vote for abortion. Why is that? Because it happened in Kansas, right? Everyone thinks Kansas is a super conservative state. It's not. You've got 1/3 is Democrat, 1/3 is conservative, and then 1/3 is these squishy Republicans that try to sabotage anything that pro-lifers do. And so the media opened up, and the pro-aborts spent like crazy. See, the pro-aborts spending a gobs of cash, and the media lying about it, and the pro-aborts won in Kansas. But because I think what they were debating in Kansas just said, well, let's let the legislature do whatever it wants on the pro-life issue and basically not have the courts decide, which I agree with that in principle, but it was so open-ended. People are like, I don't get it. If you actually went to the people of Kansas and said, let's ban abortions after 15 weeks, I think they would have said, yeah, I'm fine with that. So, and the thing, but the pro-aborts are like, yeah, but they've got this in their heads. But if it goes to the ballot, we're going to win. Look what happened to Kansas. And so they're trying to get it on the ballot in Ohio. And a lot of pro-lifers, a lot of Republicans are like freaking out. They're like, it's going to be just like Kansas. We're going to lose. No, I think we absolutely can win. We got to go on offense. We need to tell people, hey, abortion, I talk about like the gun issue, okay? And there are parallels between guns and abortion. The liberals want to get rid of guns, and it's not popular with the American people. Does that mean they just say, oh, well, I guess we won't fight? No, they fight like the Dickens on this issue. And every time something happens in the news, a tragedy, some shooting, they say, gosh, guns are horrible, but boy, Republicans and conservatives in the gun lobby, they just got to have the guns. But they, and then we call them out and they say, well, are you in favor of banning guns? And they're like, well, I didn't say that. So they kind of play these games because they realize the majority of people are on their side, are not on their side.
Also, what do they start with, too? They start with assault weapons. They start with the most extreme guns.
But see, my point with this would be like, they still, at the end of the day, they say guns are bad, essentially, right? Well, I think the pro-life movement has spent so much time during when Roe v. Wade was the law of the land of saying we should at least be able to pass some common sense regulations. And that made sense. The American people weren't necessarily with us on this issue 100%. I feel like they were with us on a good chunk of it. And so, but now that Roe is over, we still should talk about this like, yeah, we're against abortion because abortion is bad. Like, it is bad. It's bad for women. Obviously, it's horrible for the baby. It dies. But it's bad for women. Just like, why are we against Mifepristone? Because it's bad for women. Why are we against abortion? Because it causes depression. It causes suicide. It's horrible for women. It's gut-wrenching. It's horrible. That's why we're against this. But if we never say that we're against abortion because it's bad, then people are like, they start to fill in reasons why. Oh, it's a bunch of Christians are just so upset that people are sinning or something like that. You've got to assert like, hey, it's bad. That's why we're against this. It's bad for you. Obviously it's bad for your child.
Right.
Yeah.
And
So I
think,
feel like we need to reassert that a little bit more.
yeah, and going back to the point of like Congress and Republicans in Congress of a certain bent wanting to avoid it and being like, oh, we don't have to worry about it anymore. Well, the Democrats in Congress certainly don't have a problem talking about it, and they're going to keep pushing it. And nature abhors a vacuum. Politics abhors a vacuum as well. So if Lindsey Graham's not up there talking about it and pushing bills through Congress to protect more lives, then the Democrats are going to come back with their Women's Health Protection Act, and they're going to come back with their Equality Act and their DOD, the abortion for the military, like you said. So absolutely, we can't just be silent on it and be like, oh, well, we fixed it at a federal level, because it's not fixed. It's a constant battle, right? Vigilance is the price of freedom. So,
Well, right. And that reminds me of in 2012, the governor of Indiana, Mitch Daniels, was thinking about running for president.
My man,
And
Mitch.
I think he had a lot of great things going for him. He made government really good in Indiana. And there's a lot of people saying, this guy has got the smarts and he might be somebody who could really work at the federal level. And then he says, you know what? On these culture issues, when it comes to, gays, abortion, all this kind of stuff, maybe we need a truce on this for a while. And then we need to solve our problems like the deficit and entitlements and all the stuff that eventually are going to explode and we're going to go bankrupt. It's like, listen, it would be one thing if you were able to convince the entire other half of the country to do this, right? If you could somehow get all of the senators from California, New York, and the blue states to say, yeah, we're not going to push abortion and gays at every turn, but it's not on the offer. Like, they absolutely have zero interest in a truce. So all of it, talking of a truce, or we don't need to worry about this anymore, you're saying, let us lay down our arms and let these guys roll us over. Like, no, like, you have to fight back.
Yeah.
It's such a
Drives
fifth
me
grade,
crazy.
like, that's just such a fifth grade solution to
out.
world problems. Like,
Time out.
my son just says, like, well, why don't we just have a timeout, right? You said a timeout between Ukraine and Russia. Like, what if Ukraine just said to Russia, let's have a timeout, and
It's kind of a
everyone just
beautiful
like
thing, actually.
stopped? It's a beautiful thing, but my
Yeah.
son should not be running the country.
Beautifully
Like,
naive.
he should not be running the war in Ukraine,
Yeah.
and he should not be like in charge of anything. But it
All
is
right.
very beautiful and innocent and sweet. But yeah,
I'm going to
there's no
slide
truce.
this in because I was hoping Josh would say this, but I don't think you got it in. But you got in a lot of other good information. It frustrates me that pro-lifers feel like they have to play defense all the time for some reason. The most effective rhetoric I've seen is when someone goes up to someone who is unapologetically pro-abortion all the time, anytime, for any reason. Goes, okay, so do you support abortion at 9 months, a day before the baby's born? Yes or no? And the answer is always yes. I support abortion at any time for any reason. Okay, what do you think about partial birth abortion when they're halfway out? What do you think about that? And I've actually seen people answer yes. I think that you should be able to abort the child. I'm going to tell you for a fact, 99% of the country does not think that is appropriate. The silent majority is they will. It needs to stop being silent on this, because when you attack the most aggressive and extreme tenets of this, it rolls back the film.
Let's say 80.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Are
I
you
think we're
really
down to
think
80.
partial birth abortion,
Yes.
20% of the
Yeah.
country would say yes?
Yep, the law
I
is
mean,
a
I'm being
teacher. and
Crazy.
we've been brainwashed.
I'm rounding up to 80.
That is crazy. That's shocking to me. But okay, a majority of the country would say that's barbaric and insane. Right?
Yeah, the vast majority, for sure.
So why are we not leading with that? I just don't understand why people shy away from that. That's what's being advocated for. We're not talking about common sense regulations from the other side. We're talking about abortion for any reason, at any time, by any means, without consent of parents.
It's so horrible. We had this debate when we did the partial birth abortion ban debates back in the 90s. And people at the time, they're shocked. They look at the graphics and they're like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. And I think it is so horrible that people have to choose to look away. And then they get the rhetoric from NPR or the rhetoric from the Washington Post saying, well, this never happens. Nobody's ever aborting babies at 38 weeks. This actually never happens. And people are more than happy to believe that, because it is too horrible to contemplate that something like Gosnell is happening. So your average suburban white mom who might, if you showed her the aborted baby's body at 38 weeks and said, this is okay, she would just vomit and be like, but if she has CNN and Wolf Blitzer and Anderson Cooper telling her this never happens, she's like, oh my gosh, those crazy pro-lifers, they want to take women's choice away. It is too horrible for the human heart to contemplate. So that rhetoric doesn't work. They shut down.
I wish we could just say it's a baby and look at what's going on, like you say, and it's horrible and people would reject it. I'm not so sure. I think they can just there's too many times we've seen this, people just, you're right, close their eyes and willfully wish it away. And then that was weird. That was awkward. And then they move on with the rest of their life.
That was judgy.
Sort of like
they feel judged. They're like, oh, I feel judged.
Well, it's sort of like if you're driving in traffic and all of a sudden a naked man walked down the street. You're like, that was really weird. And you just kind of like, okay, and that was like this gross interruption with your life. And then you move on and you pretend like it didn't happen. Like you might mention it once or twice.
Blot it out.
Like, oh, that was really weird. But then it doesn't really arrest you. It doesn't really change your minds or hearts about the experience. That's why I feel like pro-lifers need to do a little bit more talking about, hey, like Mifepristone, which is so many abortions are chemical. Like 1 in 5 women have adverse effects, including, bleeding out, having to be run to the hospital, depression, suicide, all that stuff. Then it makes them think twice, because there is a reluctance in America, because we're a pluralistic society, and so many different people, so many different views. We know we got to kind of work it out here in this country. We got to get along with each other. And there's a reluctance to say, I'm going to force you to live how I live. And the abortion industry plays into that. And that's why I feel like the more convincing argument is to say abortion is bad for women. It makes it makes them depressed. It makes, many of them suicidal. They have regrets for the rest of their lives. We wouldn't want women to have this because it's how bad it is for them. And that, I think, is going to open up the minds and hearts and eyes of those moms in the suburbs more than anything else, I think.
I agree. And telling the stories, allowing women who have had abortions who want to share the regret to tell their story on a national stage. And we're working right now on a piece. One of our writers, Jessica Nardi, she's working on a piece where she's going through interviews with women who are telling their stories. And I have to tell you, I'm working with her, and it is just heartbreaking. And these women are saying things like, I can never go back to that day. I didn't know it would be like this. I thought I would be empowered. I could just put it behind me like a bad cold or a flu. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. And nobody hears these stories of these women. So we
Not
have
enough,
to tell them.
but they're silent no more. That's the name of the group that publicizes these women.
Great ministry.
The FBI has been found again to be snooping in Catholic churches. Now, for Loopcast listeners, regular listeners here, I think our most successful episode ever, congratulations, Erika, was when you had Kyle Seraphin, FBI whistleblower, come on and talk about how there were these tags that were being put on radical traditionalist Catholics. And that was not a one-off issue. It turns out the FBI actually, inside of the document, said, quote, tripwire and source development in mainline Catholic churches and traditional Latin masses. Notice the distinction there.
Did you say mainline Catholic churches?
Yeah. Mainline Catholic churches and traditional Latin mass.
That doesn't have echoes to the 70s. In all throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, anytime there was a major development in mainline Protestant churches, it was major news in the New York Times. And now it's like no one cares because who goes to mainline Protestant churches anymore?
Yeah. Or who goes to church
refer to most Catholic churches in the United States as mainline Catholic parishes, man, I'm not a Latin masser, but if that didn't make Latin Mass seem that much more based and awesome to have the rest of them called mainline.
Yeah,
now don't you come at me with all these people like, oh, the Loop is so pro Latin Mass, you guys are obnoxious. I always love that argument. It's like, I don't even go to the Latin Mass. I'm just saying, like, don't squash it like a bug. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Well, and if you do go to those masses, make sure when you hug your fellow parishioners, you check them for a wire, because it turns out that the FBI has admitted in this document that there were plenty of feds attending masses and trying to develop sources within Catholic churches.
There was at least one.
Well,
just to correct your story, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Okay, so there's going to be more.
Just so we're clear, obviously agents of the FBI who are Catholic go to Mass. We're talking about someone who's going to Mass in order to try to find out what's going on there.
And develop sources.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Do we not have the First Amendment? Like, what is going on here? Like, we have the freedom to exist, you people.
Yeah.
It just drives me crazy. And that was why, do you catch the committee hearing? It was so hilarious. Like, the Republican from New Jersey, Jeff Van Drew, he's a new Republican. He just flipped over like within the last couple of years. And he just he had these guys from it was the weaponization subcommittee, and he had these guys from the FBI, and he goes, I just love this. He goes, is it okay to be a Roman Catholic? And it's just like silence, right? Like, that's a question. I'd like someone to answer my question,
Please.
They're like, oh, well, yeah,
it's a great clip.
Yeah, I'll answer. Yeah, it's okay.
It's
so like,
bad.
thanks, bro.
Yeah, it was awesome to see, just like, he had the chain link wristlet, and he just looked like the most New Jersey dude ever. Hit him in a New Jersey accent with, is it okay to be Catholic, So anyway, Josh, I don't think people are super familiar with this weaponization committee, and I think it's more important than people realize. So could you just run us through the facts on this committee and how we got this?
Yeah, the weaponization subcommittee, the idea behind this was that Republicans, as they were running for Congress, it said, if we get control of the House, we're going to have a committee to investigate the DOJ and the FBI and all the stuff that they're doing. And for the most part, I think the animating desire behind them on this was like social media. You had companies like Facebook and Twitter suppressing stories. You had this situation where the FBI was like sending messages to Twitter saying, hey, could you kind of axe these accounts like remove people from Twitter because they're spreading information we don't like the fact that anyone would not just vomit. If you have an understanding of what it means to be a free people, that you would allow the FBI to send messages to Twitter and Facebook, delete these accounts. Like, I mean, if you want to talk about something that would make Thomas Jefferson spontaneously combust in flames, he'd be so angry. So I think that was like the animating principle behind what we got to form a committee to look into this stuff. And they are looking into all this stuff. But then the Catholic stuff comes along and it's like, wait a minute, what? Like, I think a lot of these Republicans were like surprised and they hit a gold mine. Like they probably didn't occur to them as they're thinking about this. Like, we got to investigate what they're doing in big tech. They got to investigate what they're doing on Facebook and Twitter and all this stuff. And they're like, wait a minute, there's FBI agents that are like going to a Catholic mass to check out what's going on and find out if they're, radicals and if there's like somehow associated with white supremacy and all this other stuff. It's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre. And again, it doesn't totally seem completely far-fetched when you think about it. Like, this is the same FBI that told guys in Chicago, the FBI office in Chicago, you know what? I know, like, for 20, 30 years, we've had a priest come in and provide ashes on your foreheads because it would be kind of disruptive of, like, all the FBI agents who are Catholic just up and left and went to mass during the middle of the day. We'll have a priest come by and put ashes on their foreheads. And this year, they're like, yeah, no. Can't do that. We're not letting them come in. And you're like, what? And it's like, and we have a military, right? Because of Biden, who's supposedly Catholic, and Lloyd Austin, the defense, the Secretary of Defense, who's supposedly Catholic,
yeah.
pushing all this pro-abortion stuff, right? And then they turn around and they say to Walter Reed, oh, we're ending our contract right so there won't be any masses at Walter Reed Hospital right before, during Holy Week. And so you're seeing up and down the line, an FBI, a DOJ, a military that is not just, they've gone from being accepting of religion to being absolutely hostile. Catholics need to open their eyes, wake up and see what's going on. And Jim Jordan, the guy who's the chairman of this subcommittee on weaponization, he is not Catholic. He's just trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. I appreciate, like, Congressman Jeff Van Drew saying, hey, I'm not even the best Catholic. Like,
I miss
some
sometimes.
Sundays. Yeah.
That was a great
But,
clip.
This just seems kind of wrong. And he's like thinking to himself, like, you go to a mass on Sunday, doesn't really feel like a hotbed of radicalism. Give me a break.
Especially a mainline parish.
His follow-up question was, what is radical Catholic ideology? Like, what?
Yeah.
And then so some of these clips are actually going some kind of viral on social media. And if for some reason, we post to all platforms, right? So we're on TikTok, and all of a sudden we're getting a ton of views on TikTok. And this was one of them. And someone in the comments, it was so funny. I was reading through the comments, and the guy's like, radical Catholic ideology is da-da-da-da-da-da. I just Googled it. Like, why is this such a hard thing for you to understand? And of course, everyone below that, like, there's no such thing. There's no such, like, did you put that in chat GPT and it spit that back at you? Like, there's no such thing as radical Catholic ideology. It's not a thing. And of course, it's tied to white supremacy and this and that, which of course, all that's BS and it's all made up. You want to talk about real misinformation? That's misinformation.
He probably got it from the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Exactly,
He
yeah.
Googled
Hate
it, went
group.
straight to their website. It was like, oh.
Yeah, their lawyers just got back from the Antifa riot down the road. But anyway, some of the language in this document was hilarious, and I'm excited to announce there's a subpoena for all other information. And guess what? It's going to be in front of the American people. I can promise you that. But the agency aimed to sensitize, quote unquote, sensitize Catholic churchgoers to, quote, to the warning signs of radicalization, end quote, and enlist their assistants to serve as suspicious activity tripwires. What are we talking? This is like out of a TV show. What are we talking about? Someone's been watching too much, I don't know, NCIS or FBI late night TV shows.
Teaching Catholics to report on their fellow Catholics for radical ideology. Yeah.
We here at CatholicVote, we're trying to get to the bottom of this. So just to give our listeners a little heads up here, on March 6th, we filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the FBI in Richmond, Virginia. That was the field office where they had that report on, the
Cal Seraphin,
traditionalist Catholics and all this stuff. So we're asking them for all the communications revolving that involved in that memo. And so the way it works with these things, like there's the law with the Freedom of Information Act law, and as well as court precedents for stuff like this, there are norms associated with this, and it requires the agency to respond within 20 business days, okay? They sometimes can ask for like an additional 10 days for unusual circumstances, right? So 30 days, if they really want to drag it out. But here it is, April, 12, 13, whatever, and we still haven't heard from these guys. We haven't had any response. So our legal team at Catholic Vote, we're prepared to bring a lawsuit within the next 10 days if we do not hear from them, as we are entitled to by law. This delay, this inaction, of course, is associated with, investigating and prosecuting the violence and vandalism being committed against pregnancy centers and Catholic churches, that our top law enforcement institutions have demonstrated a pattern of hostility against Catholics and all people of faith. We are not backing down here at Catholic Vote. It's unacceptable. And it's interesting. Just hit the wires within the last 24 hours. The President Biden's Justice Department has given a sweetheart plea deal to a person who vandalized a Catholic church with profane graffiti, destroying a statue of the Virgin Mary, assaulting a church worker, and resisting arrest. And I think it's because this vandal, was someone who claims to be transgender. And so I think the Justice Department is using total kid gloves. It just drives me absolutely bonkers. We have a Justice Department that's totally politicized and weaponized, the FACE Act. And, we demand justice on this.
Yeah. And just to contrast that sweet deal that they're giving to this person with the treatment of Mark Houck, that he had to go through the whole court system. He had to suffer through that trial, all because he defended his son.
And face the possibility of 11 years in jail.
11 years in jail.
Years. Yeah, there was no...
Long barrel rifles in his home. I doubt they showed up to his house
and even the deal he was
offered
offered included prison time. So it's just, which he didn't take. Good for him.
Yeah, did they send a SWAT team after this person that vandalized the church?
No.
Where there were like dozens of
bad
cars?
Optics. They identified the wrong way. So, yeah, we're on this, and I think there's actually a lot of, this is discouraging that there's so much persecution going on. First off, it's not the first time Christians have been persecuted in history, and I doubt it'll be the last. And then also, there's a lot of encouraging signs within government in terms of the Committee on Weaponization, some of these big wins that we're bringing up here. We're going to get a lot of information. Catholic Vote's a part of getting that information, so really encouraging, and I encourage you all to stay tuned. Like, we are going to be getting some very primary source stuff here coming up. So that's my pitch. If you guys aren't subscribed right now, go on over, subscribe on all platforms. We want to be in your inbox every Thursday. And when we do bonus episodes, we have a good bonus episode coming up here. You'll be ready for it. So, Twilight Zone, everyone's favorite segment. I actually have been seeing in analytics that there's a huge spike at Twilight Zone. So I think we're doing something right here.
Guys.
Skipping to the end, skipping to the dessert. So speaking of treats, Erika, I hear you're going to give one up. What's your Twilight Zone here?
Yeah, mine revolves around snacks because I do love eating, especially during Easter week. And well, the Native American princess disappeared from my Land O'Lakes tub of butter a couple of years ago. My kid's Cheez-Its box now has a self-identified drag queen RuPaul on the front of it. So I'm like, what is up? So I'm doing a little bit of digging. And of course, we had another great piece from our writers last week, just detailing all of the companies that have gone all in with self-described girl, a male named Dylan Mulvaney.
Scam artist, man.
Yeah, scam artist, womanface.com.
Yeah.
Going on with Dylan there. So I'm just like, what is going on? Why are all these trans people showing up? The Indian princesses are disappearing. And it turns out, of course, this is not about compassion. This isn't because Nabisco loves trans people, but it has everything to do with what is called the ESG score, right? So this is, it's a score that companies have that demonstrates how sensitive they are to the most radical leftist agendas. And if you go even further down, we have the Human Rights Campaign has a new index called the corporate, well, it's not new, it's 20 years old, but it's recently been tied to ESG scores. It's called the Corporate Equality Index, the CEI. And if your CEI from Human Rights Campaign is bad, your ESG is bad. And what that means is you don't get investments from the big shots like BlackRock, these huge investment companies. They look at your ESG. If you want top ratings, you have to show the Human Rights Campaign that you have taken concrete steps to establish and implement comprehensive policies, benefits, and practices to ensure greater equity for LGBTQ plus workers and their families. And I know a lot of people who work for these large companies. If you work for a large financial consulting firm here in Connecticut, for example, you have experienced this shift in your company making these changes in order to better your CEI score. So we're looking at things like expanding mandatory service and treatment options for people who want to transition their gender in your office, including collecting data on workplace inequality. And this includes hostility. So if you're reported for being hostile to same-sex couples, your company's tracking that. That's upping their score with the Human Rights Campaign. It includes DEI training for employees, mandatory training, and performance evaluation for senior leadership in companies based on their demonstrated commitment to the rainbow flag. And of course, a huge part of your score is, have you publicly promoted the LGBTQ plus Two-Spirit community with figureheads? And I'm saying Two-Spirit, you're laughing, Tom. In Canada, it's actually part of the thing now. Dylan and RuPaul. So when you see these trans people promoting Bud Light or Nabisco products, or Walmart has them, that is for a reason, and it is to get the score, and it is to make money. And it is just crazy. The Human Rights Campaign has a huge report out right now on Fortune 500 companies and large law firms that have participated in the CEI. And 67% of the biggest businesses around the world it's 86% of all the CEI rated businesses now offer transgender inclusive health insurance. They have great scores for friendliness. This is up from 0% in 2002. That means in the last 21 years, all these companies that now have Dylan and all on their boxes, so your kids can look at drag queens while they're eating their Cheez-Its, these guys have totally folded and totally caved. So for me, like, digging into this Cheez-It box was not only very tasty, but it was also totally eye-opening. I love Cheez-Its. It was totally eye-opening, especially the extra toasty ones. Oh my gosh, I could just eat those
the
all
brown
day.
ones are the
Yeah,
best.
like the super brown ones, little
Those are
burned.
so good.
Oh, I love
Yeah.
them. I'm looking at the box. I'm like, what happened? But it was really eye-opening. Companies that scored 100% this year on their CEI. So Walmart, Amazon, Exxon, Apple, JP Morgan, Xerox, Nike. And this is everybody, all the big shots.
Well,
Yeah.
Top CEI
think-
score.
I don't think we're going to get completely rid of the politicization of corporations.
No.
But I do feel we are really bound for a correction here. And I do feel all the signs point to an economic recession coming around the corner. And the question is, are all these DEI and politicization, why I'm tripping on that word, but with a recession around the corner, I do feel all these DEI stuff are really in a lot of trouble, because are these political movements by these corporations truly recession proof? If the economy turns and takes a real correction, these corporations are going to have to cut costs. And I think they get rid of a lot of their DEI guys right from the start, because they're not adding to the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we'll see.
I've
always made the point.
I don't know. I think I struggle to even see that, because what a lot of people don't know is the CEO of BlackRock was one of the founders of ESG. He's come out and talked about a new, more inclusive, equitable way to invest. Of course, framing it with moral terms, because that's what
Equity
works
is the future,
for people.
is his tagline.
Right, equity is the
Equity is
future.
the
Well,
future.
right, and what we're starting to see, though, is some states, red states, are smartly pushing back and divesting their from these BlackRock and some of these other radical groups. Like BlackRock is you're right, it's an investment firm, so-called, but that's what they do. But the whole point is they are ideological first, and they're pushing this ESG and all this stuff. And so we need to push back. We need to tell our lawmakers, don't allow, especially if you live in a red state, don't allow pension funds to be invested in these, like BlackRock funds that are pushing ESG stuff. It's terrible.
Josh, you're up. Twilight Zone.
You mentioned before Canada and the Two Spirits thing. There's also a new push in Canada. There's a member of the parliament who's pushing for a bill that would criminalize making any offensive remarks within 100 meters of a drag queen story hour. It's just absolutely insane. Absolutely insane.
1984, anyone? Yeah.
But did,
I mean,
did
it's
you
like-
see the collection
Thought
of people,
police.
Josh? The collection of people at the press conference was like, it was the oddest, most eclectic group of
Yeah.
weirdos you could possibly find.
And
they're
then
like,
this
let's
little
throw
like
them in front of
9-year-old
the-"
girl, just like
Yeah,
standing
it's
there
like,
looking
what?
very confused, like little
Yeah,
9-year-old
exactly.
child. I was like, I want to say, like, go get her and save her.
Take her, yeah.
Oh
So
my
like
gosh.
the abortion movement started with this idea you need to have a bubble of, a woman should be able to go into an abortion facility and have 8 feet around her of freedom to not be spoken to, even on a public sidewalk. And so now the drag queens are like, we need to do the same thing too. You can't be within 100 meters, and say anything I would consider offensive.
Right.
And
And
so
who gets to
it-
determine what's offensive speech? That's the frightening part too.
Super
It's-
liberal on
Yeah,
that.
so this to me is like this is introducing a new idea. They're going to test it out in Canada and see if it clicks. And then I wouldn't be surprised to have lawmakers here in the United States to try to do it too. And for the attacks we've had on religious freedom, why wouldn't there be more and more attacks on free speech? And
Uh-huh.
we've already had attacks on free speech. So
Yeah.
that to me is total Twilight Zone.
I mean, I'm hoping it's as popular as Indigenous land acknowledgement. But Canada's had some real humdingers of ideas, unfortunately.
I wonder if praying the rosary would be offensive speech. I'm thinking of my public library had a family drag show last June, and some women from my parish organized, like 15 people showed up and just knelt in the back row and said the rosary for half an hour. And yeah, that probably would be illegal in Canada if this
Well, you
goes
couldn't
through.
In England. You couldn't
Yeah, I was going to
pray,
say in
right?
England, you couldn't
Right. In
silently
England,
pray.
you can't pray outside of a abortion
Silently.
Silently pray.
Right.
You're just in your
Right.
head.
right?
Yeah, that was a crazy clip too. There's like a cop that came up to her and said,
Yeah,
"Were you
she was
praying?"
arrested twice.
Said,
when she went
"Yeah,
home.
I was praying, but what?
A Catholic
How's it
priest
even-"
was arrested too.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's good to be aware of these for when that even a whiff of that comes to America.
Uh-huh.
Anyone that claims to believe in free speech and the First
I
Amendment
mean,
should
if we
be
were a
all over
serious
that.
country, we consider sanctions against those two countries for their violations
Canada
of
and the
human rights.
UK get
Yeah,
sanctions.
for our commitments, but instead we're
Well,
mad
we
at
got to get our own house in order
Right.
first.
Yeah, we do.
Instead, we're mad at Africa for defending their own sovereignty and not wanting to pass LGBTQ rights things. And we're like, oh, we're going to stop
Right.
investing over there. It's just, we're not a
Right,
serious
right.
country. Anyway, speaking of unseriousness, so this was maybe a career highlight, a personal inspiration to me. I'm going to tease it. So I actually got to speak to Riley Gaines in an interview. I'm not going to say all of the things you said, but we got a super comprehensive story, and I think an element to her story that has not been covered elsewhere that we got to talk about a lot. So another pitch, please subscribe. It's going to be coming out soon. She's a total inspiration to me and many. So she was in the news again. I think it was a weekend. It was not last weekend. Or actually, no, it was last weekend. She went out to San Francisco State University, and she gave a talk about her experiences as a swimmer, swimming against Leah Thomas and being in the locker room while male genitalia was around and just being done completely wrong by the NCAA. She's on the warpath to ensure equality for competition for women. She's a fierce defender of women's rights, as she should, and safety, of course. But so she gave this speech at San Francisco, and she was literally held hostage by students there because they did not like the message that she was spreading. So as soon as her speech ended, some protesters killed the lights, started flashing flashlights at her. It truly looked like a horror movie. She was being escorted out by someone. She said she didn't even really know who to trust, but she was being escorted. She couldn't get fully out of the building because the mob had kind of trapped her in there. They had her in a room, and she had to be in there for 3 hours until she could safely leave, until enough protesters dispersed for her to get out of there. And the funniest element to this, to me, was they were demanding a ransom. They said, if you paid her to be here, then we deserve to get paid for having to listen to it. And I believe it was the assistant dean came and was reasoning with these people.
Oh my
like,
goodness.
Actually entertaining that as like a logical idea. Well, there's some issues with that. First off, she didn't get paid to be there, by the way. which only makes me respect her more. She totally went to the Lions Den for no financial benefit of her own, just because she truly believes that. But these people were like, no, we want to get paid. She eventually gets out there safely. She actually got assaulted by one of the people, and I think she's going to file a lawsuit. It's just the most unbelievable stuff, right? So if anyone questions Riley's commitment to her cause, it's, I think, unquestioned now. She's just basically a hero in regards to this. So Megan Rapinoe, she is famous for playing on the U.S. women's soccer team. I believe they've won some gold medals. They had a pretty good run. She's notoriously lesbian, progressive, very outspoken.
In your face.
Very in your
Yeah,
face. Very off-putting, very in your face. Quite the opposite of Riley, to be honest. And then she shot out a tweet basically saying that trans women should be able to compete in whatever sport they want to compete in, that they're being attacked, and that we need to actually get legislation in place to protect this. Said, call your congressional rep today to say women's sports need protection from unequal pay, sexual abuse, lack of resources, not from trans kids. And Riley had one of the best responses I think I've seen on Twitter. I mean, she is just sharp, and so she says, it's worth noting that 1, you are done playing sports competitively, and 2, because you aren't sexually attracted to men, you will never have a daughter to defend. To me, this simply looks like virtue signaling because you have nothing to lose. And then she goes on to say, the response was even better. I can respect opinions that differ from my own, and everyone is entitled to think, speak independently, but I can't help but think Megan Rapinoe would genuinely shiv any male who tried to take her spot on the U.S. women's national team.
Okay, so here's what gets interesting about this. So Megan Rapinoe is claiming women's soccer should get equal pay as men's, And I thought Will Kane had a really good rant about this. He said, you shouldn't ask for equal pay. You should if you sell more tickets and if you sell more jerseys and you get more people watching your TV show, watching entertainment, like you're entertaining more people, selling more tickets, selling more jerseys, you should be paid more. Why would you want to be paid less? Like if women's soccer is more popular than men's soccer, shouldn't you get paid more? But the fact is it isn't.
It is not.
And so
by a long
it's not
shot.
getting as much money. And here's the thing that gets me about this. You know why it doesn't get paid as much? So about 6 years ago, the women's national team was getting, preparing, they do these exhibition games or whatever, right? And they're getting ready to play Russia, and they decide to go play a soccer game against Dallas Academy team. This is okay, now
15-year-olds, by the way.
Yeah.
Boys that are under 15 years old, and they lost. They lost fight. The women's national soccer team plays a Dallas under 15-year-old boys academy team, and they lost 5-2.
Right. Which
So,
is maybe why she wants trans women on the team.
It's
'Cause the
true.
game
I'm
will
not
get
saying I'm a
better.
good. First of all, I think soccer's borderline communist. I hate it anyway. But I'm not trying to say I'm any kind of athlete. If I went up against a women's soccer team, I get my butt kicked. Of course, I would lose. I don't want to play soccer. I'm not good at it. Okay, but this idea it should be paid equally. It's like, give me a break. And the whole point is, if you open up the women's soccer team to anyone who claims they're men, then this whole Dallas football team could have claimed their girls and then just play the game.
15-year-old boys.
Yeah.
Wouldn't they would be the champions, right?
They would have won a
Wow.
gold medal.
women's
Yeah.
soccer team.
Kind of what happened
Josh-
with Leah Thomas, right?
Josh,
Hey.
I played soccer.
Uh,
I appreciate soccer. I'm going to take the bait. Why do you feel that soccer is borderline communist?
I don't know. It's just the game is so boring that the fights break out in the stands because there's nothing going on the
There's
field.
nothing else to do.
Oh, Josh. Yeah. Maybe
At
one
least
day
in
you'll
hockey, the
appreciate
fight
it.
is with the players. You watch. Oh, this is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. Hell, Lazo's not going to feel very good about that.
A growing respect for hockey as they're kind of shrugging off the Pride Night stuff. A lot of those guys are just salt of the earth type guys.
Yeah.
A lot of Russian Orthodox type dudes over there. They're based. So that does it for this week's edition of the Loopcast. This is so much fun for us to do, and we really appreciate all of you listening. Seriously, we truly appreciate all your support and hope you had a great Easter. If you want to support us, if you want to help us, a few things. Leave a review, Apple Podcasts especially. It helps us a ton. You can write a personalized review. It goes a long way. Review us on Spotify. And then the inbox. If you want to get in touch with me, if you have comments, questions, concerns, loopcast@catholicvote.org. the best way you can do this if you share it with a friend. So shout out to, I forget her name, but I was with my mother-in-law over the weekend. This always,
You forgot your
forgot your
mother-in-law's name?
mother-in-law's
no,
name?
no.
Oh,
I'm not gonna,
man.
I'm not here to dox anyone, but my mother-in-law, she's a wonderful woman. She was at a silent retreat. And so I don't know how this came out at a silent retreat, but she
Women's
was
silent
talking.
retreats are never.
There's still women.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this might have been at the end of the retreat when you could talk. So I'm not throwing any shade anywhere. But she was talking about her children, said, I have 8 children and I have this son-in-law, and talking about what they do. So it works for this organization called CatholicVote. And the first thing that this lady said was, "Oh my gosh, I love the Loopcast. I listen every week. I send it to all my friends." And she's like, "Oh, that's actually my son on the podcast." And she didn't think that I was you, Josh.
Now it's your son, not son-in-law.
Yeah. No, so I must have gained one there, but
Yeah.
it's always cool for me to hear just random stories like that where people have got the Loopcast, really enjoy it, love it, and we're infiltrating silent retreats. So
Here's the thing. We love talking about these issues. We love trying to help Catholics understand what's going on in the news, and we do it through our daily loop, and we do it through the Loopcast, and we're just very appreciative for all the positive feedback we get. This we really do enjoy doing it, and we do it for our audience. So
yeah.
We like those comments, obviously.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for everything.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
We're happy to serve.
We will see you on the next one. Bye.